Hello and welcome to Solopreneur, the show that helps business owners who are flying solo to solve their big sales, marketing, and systems challenges one episode at a time. You can watch the video version of this episode at solopreneur.com. I'm Gareth Everson, and on today's episode, I'm going to be sharing with you two resources that you can use to help you go from business startup mode to business scale-up mode. In the last couple of episodes, episode 24 and episode 25, I've honed in a little bit on some of the challenges that solo business owners face when it comes to establishing traction for your business. In episode 24, I talked about the two forks in the road for any small solopreneur business. The first fork in the road was all about being able to get to the point where you're turning in the right direction around having a viable and a scalable and a predictable source of business that's coming into you from activities that you're undertaking marketing-wise. On episode 25, I talked about 5 questions that you should be asking yourself in order to niche down your idea into one that's viable and scalable as a business entity, and to hone in perhaps a little more how you go about attracting the right types of clients into your business to build a business that scales. First of all, let's talk about the difference between a startup business and a scale-up business. Many people have this misconception of a startup business being something that is time-bound, that is where you're perhaps in the first 3 months, 6 months, 12 months of your business life. And that's a misconception. And I'll tell you why. A startup business is one that still hasn't got to the point where there is a predictable return on your promotional, your marketing activity that turns into sales that are profitable. That's a truer definition of what a startup is. And by contrast, a scale-up business is one whereby you can get predictable returns from predictable inputs into a business. So if we take the marketing analogy, for every hour that you spend creating content or promoting your business on socials or in emails or in blogs or like this in podcasts, you can predictably get, say, 5 hours of paid client work that comes off the back of it, or packages of client work that come off the back of those inputs that you put in. Or if you're at the point of being able to advertise your business, for every pound of advertising that you put in, are you able to predictably generate £5 or £10 worth of business in the back end? That truly is the difference between a startup business and a scale-up business. And the two resources I'm going to share with you on this podcast are all about helping you to refine what your offering is when you're in startup mode. I learned about these two resources when I was part of a business incubator. In 2017, I joined a business incubator called Entrepreneurial Spark. They had multiple locations around the country, and it was backed by NatWest and KPMG as its major sponsors. And their goal was to basically reduce the failure rate of new small businesses. And I joined that incubator with a business idea that I wanted to test. I ran that business between 2017 and 2022. And whilst I don't run it now, some of the lessons that I learned from the early stages of exploring whether there was a viable business offering in that idea are ones that have really helped me to guide other business owners and to think about how I would approach any new business ideas, any new business ventures that I want to undertake now. And the first resource, or one of the first resources that the team at Entrepreneurial Spark used with us in our intake, bearing in mind there were, I think something like 60 or 70 business owners that came in my cohort, all of whom were running really different businesses or wanting to run really different businesses. One thing that was standard across the entire cohort was that we needed to find clients or customers for our businesses. And one tool that the trainers at Entrepreneurial Spark helped us to use was a tool that was developed by a company called Strategizer, specifically a chap called Alex Osterwalder, called the Business Model Canvas. And what the Business Model Canvas does is, on one page, you have 9 blocks to fill in about what your business will do. And the idea behind this is a relatively straightforward one, that in one place on one A4 sheet of paper, you want to be able to see the key components of what is going to make that business a successful proposition. So those 9 blocks that you answer the questions around need to give you that clarity. And what I love about the Business Model Canvas is that whether you are a startup one-person venture or you're a huge multinational corporation, the Business Model Canvas has the 9 questions on there that you need to answer to be able to test if your business idea is viable and if you can get clarity around some key factors in there. The team behind it, the team at Strategizer, do lots of high profile consulting with large multinational corporations. They're paid significant sums of money to be able to guide the likes of Coca-Cola and large multinational banks on the establishment of either new business ventures or new product offerings around using this business model canvas. I'll put a link in the show notes, but there's also a book that's available on Amazon for under £20 that takes you through the 9 steps of answering the business model canvas, and it's called Business Model Generation. I'll also include a link to a template that I created off the back of doing this myself, where you can see a Google Slide version of the business model canvas that you can fill in yourself, perhaps with the use of either online resources or the book itself if you want to buy it from Amazon. But let me take you through, just at a very high level, the 9 components of what goes into that business model canvas. The first thing that it asks you is, who are your customer segments? For whom are we creating value out there in the market? And there's a nice large box for you to be able to outline specifically who you're creating value for. The second thing, and it kind of relates to your customer segments, are customer relationships. So the second box is customer relationships. What kind of relationship does each of those customers have with us, and how are we going to interact with them? Then the third piece relates to channels. So what marketing channels are we going to use in order to be able to attract those target customers into our world? The fourth box, and this is the one that I think is the most important one of the entire page, is your value proposition. What problem that our customers encounter are we going to solve? It might be one problem, it might be multiple problems. What are we doing to solve that problem? And that is our value proposition. And why is that value proposition important? So the fourth box, and in my opinion, the most important one, is value proposition. Once you've established what that value proposition relates to, and there's a structure for answering how you document a value proposition, we then need to have a group of key activities. So box number 5 relates to key activities that will be required to be undertaken in our business. That leads on nicely to box number 6. So in order to do those key activities, what are our key resources that we need in order to fulfill those activities? Box number 7 is called Key Partners. And I think this lends a recognition to the fact that in a small business, we don't have the resources, the capabilities to be able to do everything ourselves usually. So, are there any key partners that we can lean on or leverage to be able to bring our product or our service to market effectively, to be able to deliver those services to our clients? Key partners. So those 7 boxes, and you'll see this when you look at the business model canvas, you'll see those 7 boxes at the top of the page. Those are the ones that determine what our business looks like, who we're serving, how we're serving them, and what we need in order to be able to serve them. Then at the bottom of the page, there are 2 other boxes, the final 2 boxes. The first of those is, what's our cost structure? What does our cost structure look like in order to be able to deliver those things in order to make our business viable? And then finally, the 9th box is revenue streams. So, what are our target customers likely to be willing to pay? What are they paying elsewhere for similar services? And therefore, how profitable can we make this business opportunity for us? So those are the 9 key components to the business model canvas. To recap what they are again: customer segments, customer relationships, channels, a value proposition, key activities, key resources, key partners, the cost structure, and the revenue streams. And if you take the time, this might take a day to do your first draft, and then I would encourage you to come back to it perhaps a couple of days later, maybe a week later, once you've had time to think it through. Come back to this business model canvas to assess if you've got any key gaps in there and if you need to make any refinements. When I did my business model canvas for my software startup back in 2017, it took me 8 iterations to get to a model that I was comfortable with and that I was happy with to move forward. The great thing about the business model canvas when you are still in startup mode, and you might have been running your business for 2 or 3 years without really truly getting that traction, perhaps even longer. The great thing about doing the business model canvas is that in one place, it helps you to see where you've got real clarity around what your business is doing. But most importantly, it allows you to see where there are gaps that you need to work on in your business. And that was the really valuable thing for me when I did my own business model canvas. The second resource that I want to share with you on this episode is a book called The Lean Startup by Eric Ries. And this book is the first place, I think, where it became really common to talk about a minimum viable product for your business. And the core premise about developing a startup in a lean method using the minimum viable product principle is that we're testing assumptions for a business idea and validating by going out to market or going out and doing research or perhaps even trying to make sales. We're validating those assumptions with a very basic version of our product or service without expending too much time, too many resources to fully develop out something that we realize later down the line that isn't the right fit for our market. The lean startup and the business model canvas go hand in hand, in my opinion, to help you to test and validate and to prove that your business idea is one that's worthwhile pursuing. And if it isn't, if you get information back when you're testing these ideas, when you're validating these assumptions, he talks about validating assumptions a lot in the lean startup. It allows you to learn from those failed assumptions or those assumptions that have come back as incorrect and tweak and change and iterate the way that you make that offering. He talks about pivoting the way that you position what your product does or your service does. He also stresses the importance of engaging with prospects and prospective clients for your service, building into validating your assumptions, discussion, extensive discussion, if you can do, with people who are in your market for your product. Because if you don't do that, and if you don't use the language that they're using to be able to tweak and change and pivot the way you present that product or service to your market, you'll continually go down a pathway that's out of line with what they actually really need. And to use my forks in the road analogy, you'll find yourself back at that first fork more often than not. Once you find that viable route, that viable path, that viable offering, he then advocates for what he calls scaling cautiously. So once you've found a messaging and a product or a service that fits with the needs of your prospective clients, test that model in a one-to-one setting or with small groups first of all, then hone and tweak the way you deliver and offer it on a wider basis. So who should do the exercises that I've talked about in today's episode? In my opinion, definitely those business owners who haven't yet got to a stage where they're getting predictable returns for their efforts and their investments into their business. If you're still in what I call the startup phase. If you're not in that scale-up phase where you're getting predictable returns for the advertising money that you're putting in or the time efforts that you're putting in to promote your business, then definitely look at the Business Model Canvas and Eric Ries's Lean Startup book. If you are already on a pathway to being able to get relatively predictable returns for efforts that you're putting in, if you're moving into that scale-up type mode, but you haven't yet looked at the Business Model Canvas or you haven't yet read the Lean Startup, I'd still encourage you to look at both of those resources. Certainly to dig into some of the online materials if you don't want to read the two books. Because what I found, even though I'd been in business for 10 years by the time I joined this business incubator, and I knew certain things about how I could start a business and grow a business, going through the process in the incubator when I was able to go through that business model canvas and to explore what Eric Ries talked about in the Lean Startup, it allowed me to refine a whole lot more my approach to certain aspects of what went into the business model canvas. There'll be lessons that you can take away from looking at resources related to both of those two topics. For me, the lessons that were really valuable were validating ideas. So using Eric Ries's idea validation process from the Lean Startup was exceptionally valuable for me. I was in that mode of having assumptions, to use his terminology, around what a product offering might need to look like, a service offering might need to look like for my clients, but without necessarily stress testing that by speaking to target customers, target users. That was a big shift in my approach once I read that. And from the business model canvas, the two parts that for me were really useful were, ironically, the one around customer relationships. What kind of relationships would you be having with your prospects and your clients? So that particular block was one that I'd probably had a little bit of a blind spot to prior to it. The value proposition builder and the components that went into the value proposition builder were exceptionally useful to me to be able to position every business launch, every business venture, every business service idea that I've brought to market since then, exceptionally valuable to go through that process around that. And then also to think about the key partners that were in my business. Partners, as I mentioned earlier in this episode, are a great way to be able to scale up your one or few person venture into something that's a lot more significant than it is or what you can achieve on your own. So those were the key parts of the business model canvas that really helped me to develop out my offering and offerings since then. So 2 excellent resources that you can learn from if you're in startup mode, or if you want to refine your offer and your business model slightly if you're in scale-up mode. You can get access to the links to these resources if you go to solopreneur.com/EP26. I'll include links to all the resources that I've talked about on this episode, including a link to a blank template of the business model canvas that you can take a copy of and start to play with yourself in terms of filling in those 9 boxes. If you do take the time to look at either of those, then drop me a note to let me know how you get on or ask me any questions that you have. If you drop me an email at hello@solopreneur.com, I'd love to have that interaction with you and explore where you got to with these and see if there's a way that I can help you hone those or help you review some of the inputs that you put into the business model canvas. Thanks for listening to this episode of the Solopreneur podcast. Remember that what we learned today builds more value if there's a plan to take action on it tomorrow. So head to solopreneur.com and check out our growing community of action takers and all the training and software that you need to build a scalable business without breaking the bank. And if you value the show, please help others to discover it too by leaving us a review wherever you get your podcasts or by sharing a link to an episode on LinkedIn or wherever your finger does its scrolling.